Hello everyone, my name is Mindy Mo Wang. I'm a composer and a contemporary Guzheng performing artist. And today I will tell you something, I will introduce Chinese music to you. Chinese music contains so much of a different thing in there. You know, it started, what we know, like it started from about 9,000 years ago. When they discovered bamboo flute from a tomb. And then that's the approval. The music was already existing around that time in China. So since then, the music has developed and blossomed into different directions. For example, at the beginning, it was just all very simple melodies, and a lot of music were percussive, and the instruments were very, very simple. But later on, when around the Zhou dynasty, music became more sophisticated, but it still wasn't for everyone. It was more for the royal family and the people who is high up in the system, so they could enjoy some music. But then later on in Tang Dynasty, this is when music became really big. It became really big everywhere in China. For example, around that time, because of the Silk Road, a lot different culture has came into China, so they all brought in different culture and music influence, and so the religion brought music in, and also the instrument has developed even more sophisticated, and then people start doing solo performance, getting in a group, doing chamber performance, and there are music for what we call a ya yue, for literally means elegant music. There were more for very, like royal families, very important ceremonies. And then we have music actually popular among the scholars. And music actually became quite became like not just one singular thing by itself. It started associated with dance, with a poem, around that time, and then it began spread to common people, and they start enjoy singing songs and play different kind of instrument. So around that time, before Tang Dynasty, music were still quite simple and singular, and during Tang Dynasty, it blossomed really developed very fast. And then later on, in Yuan, Song, and Yuan dynasty, music became a lot more associated with literature. So, for example, in Song dynasty, where we have this what we call Song Ci. Ci literally means lyrics, but they're a kind of form of a poem, which always being performed or performed with music. And in Yuan dynasty, which came after Song, the most popular form is Yuan Qu. Qu actually literally means song or music. So that's another form of how you would read out a poem. So the literature and music became very intertwined together around that time, which influenced a lot by the philosophers. For example, Confucius. And so around that time, the music also became fall into very detailed categories. Opera became popular and enjoyed by a lot common people, and music is common in the tea houses, People loved dancing, and the dancing music became a almost very common thing for festivals, for rituals, for gathering. And after Song, Yuan, we're entering Ming and Qing dynasty. Ming dynasty, Qing dynasty. This is a time when Chinese music actually form a very comprehensive structure and became even more diverse. So now we have a general idea of how music developed through the history in China. And I would like to talk about musical instruments. We have hundreds different kind of musical instruments in China. And some of them are originally from China and developed through time. And some of them actually were borrowed. So they might be borrowed from different country, but then through time it became something else. So you can almost see the shadow of some other Western or Middle Eastern instrument in China, a Chinese musical instrument now. So for example, the music instrument I play, it called gu zheng. Gu actually means ancient, and zheng is the original name. It's part of what we call in the string family, and actually that's a very similar concept that you would get in a Western orchestra. You have a string section, you have a percussion horn section, but even though it's a string instrument, fall in the category of silk. Silk is string. Like back then, there was all silk. Silk actually means string in Chinese, the ancient instrument categories. But when we now look at all the instrument, we actually put them in 4 different big categories according to the technique you use. For example, we have a bowed instrument, a plucked instrument, winged and blow instrument, and a percussive instrument. So now let's have a look at some of those instruments and have a look at the image of them. Now let's start with wind and blowed instruments. In this category, the typical instruments are di, 笛子, xiao, 排箫, 埙, 笙, 乌巴, 唢呐. As you can see, they all look really different. And some of them played just like a Western flute, but some of them actually played like shakuhachi. A lot of them, the sound is very different. Some of them are very sharp, and some of them are very low and very meditative. Next category, we want to have a look at the plucked musical instrument. Some of the most representative instruments in this category, they are guqin, guzheng, this is the instrument I play, ruan, 琵琶, 乐琴, 箜篌, 三弦, 冬不拉, 热把谱. So all those instruments now you see on the screen, and you can say they are like from size, from the structure, they're completely different. So they do actually produce a very, very different kind of sound. If you're interested, I really encourage you to search and listen to it. Try to listen to each of the instrument. Now let's move to percussive instrument. As we all know, like in Asia, there are lots of different kind of drums in the traditional music. So now let's have a look at what other percussive instrument we have. Now you can say yangqin, 唐鼓, we also call it 大鼓, 云锣, 编钟, 大小锣, 铜锣. All those percussive instruments, actually, they might look similar, but they really have a different use and have a very different sound. So percussive instruments are heavily used in traditional operas. So even, like I just listed a few, but if you go into the operas, there are so many different kind of a percussive instrument. If you're interested, you can dig a bit more in that. So the last one, bowed instrument. There are some really famous instruments in this family. For example, 二胡. 二胡 has been played so many traditional music, but also used in opera, and now recently have been used a lot in the Western music. So it's probably one of the most well-known bowed instrument from China. But also in the similar family, we have a 板胡, 京胡, 革胡. Another one that actually looks like they're in the same family, but the sound is so different, and it's from the Mongolian ethnic group. It's called 马头琴, horse head fiddle. And this is an instrument produce very deep sound, almost, the Hu family, they're like a violin, viola, cello, double bass. They all play different music parts in the Chinese orchestra, just like what the string section does in the Western musical orchestra. So now you can say there are so many different kinds of musical instruments actually from China. But how does people play? Like how do they read the scores? So they are different because the Western notation system is only just being introduced to China in last maybe 30, 40 years. It became more popular. But in the past, in China, we have a different system of notation. And there are more than one. So I want to give you some examples. We have a character-based notation. For example, like 公尺谱, 简字谱. Now you can see it on the screen. They look like just writing of an article. You probably can't link that with instrument. But their system, for example, on 公尺谱, the different characters represent pitch, and they're added on around the characters to tell you the octave and the technique, or whether you should bend the string, and how long you played it. So this was a very traditional way of notate music in the history in the past. But recently, what's more popular before we start to incorporate and learn use Western notation, what's popular and is still popular today in China is using 简谱. Now you can see an example of 简谱 on the screen. Okay, this is nothing like characters. It looks like mathematics. All you can see is numbers. And so how does that work? When you look at the number 1, 1 is the key. And then each other number is the distance between the key, like the number 1. And the dots and the curves, everything means different things. So that's a common notation being used in China for traditional music. In fact, I think it's still more commonly used compared with Western notation. The only reason I think for the traditional players use the notation is that they can play and understand when they work with the people who doesn't know this notation, they can work together. But I think most traditional player really just prefer to use the jianpu, this number notation in China. When we think about Chinese music, I think it is actually such a rich and big topic, and I was thinking maybe I can give you some examples of different kind of music that are from China and then fall into different categories of Chinese music. For example, dance music, which is not a doof-doof dance music that you're familiar with. Dance music is a type of music that actually more originally associated with the royal court, where they play music and they're dancers too. Their work is to entertain the emperors. And later on, all those simplified versions of those kind of dance music became popular among the common people outside of court, and they formed a lot of popular forms of dance matched with popular form of music in the history. And now I want to give you an example of a typical dance music from northwest China. Another category that actually exists in many different cultures is music linked with religion. But in China, we have a lot of different religions. So even the religious music it contains so many different types. For example, because the Buddhism came into China during Tang Dynasty, so lots of Buddhism influenced music, which is quite meditative, and the rhythm is steady, and usually play in a small chamber format. Those kind of music is popular, and it became one of the main type in the religious music. But then you also have like a Tibetan religious music, where you will see a lot of percussive and huge wind instrument in their ceremonies. And then if you go to Taoist places, and then the music they play are very different. For example, they will always use percussive instrument called muyu. So it's basically a round wooden thing, and you just tap the wood. That is something would have used in the Buddhism religious music as well, actually. And then there were some religious music, they are actually linked with rituals. They are in the smaller, they're a bit smaller compared with what I've just mentioned of those bigger and more popular ones. Now I would like to show you an example of religious music from China. Okay, so one thing people actually know about Chinese music is operas. So they're not like Western operas. Chinese operas is very intense and usually is full of everything, like the performance, costumes, colors, bands, very loud, very playful. So even those operas, like what mostly people know a lot about Beijing opera. They're the most famous opera type, traditional opera type from China. But also, you have a qingqiang. Qingqiang is one of the oldest form of Chinese traditional opera, because in around Tang Dynasty, the capital was actually in Xi'an. And Xi'an, Shanxi, this whole area, we call it Qing. So this is actually the original Chinese opera, so that Qingqiang. And also we have Chuanju, like from Sichuan, and they have a lot of you might know they do this face change in the opera, which is also very entertaining. There are different kind of operas, and here's an example of the Chinese opera. So, like all the other cultures, we do have lots of solo instruments. So a lot of instrument is in the history being played in the solo, and then now also we often see those instruments play solo performances. Here are some examples of those solo instruments, but they play solo music. It doesn't mean that they are not included in the ensemble sometimes. So it's just like you're more likely to see them play solo instrument. And of course, the big ensembles. They have a long history. Because when I talk about a very early time in the court music, it's more, always is being the performance form is the ensembles. So the different kind of you can imagine the equivalent of a chamber orchestras, and there are different kind of an even bigger one like a symphony orchestras. In China, they have a similar kind of ensembles through the history in different stages. So I would like to show you a modern interpretation of what court music, chamber music would sound like and look like in the old days. Okay, so here's our first little video about the Chinese music, and I think like what Chinese music, why Chinese music is so rich. And first, it's because the long history of development, and because of the trading with on the Silk Road, the influence from neighboring countries, but also because in China we have 56 ethnic groups, which a lot of people probably doesn't know about it. The majority is Han. Han, there's I think around 97% of Chinese population, they are Han. And the other 55, they are divided into different ethnic groups. Most of those ethnic groups, they have their own music, they have their own cultures. So, combined with the history, combined with the communication with neighbor country, and combined with the rich culture from ethnic groups, it built a super big and rich Chinese music. We were talking about Chinese music in the general sense today. So please join me for the next one, where I will lead the conversation to my instrument, and I will tell you everything about it.